Every reference or Easter egg featured in the first Iron Man film. The origin story. For starters, the film updates Tony's origin story from the comics. In his 1963 origin story, Tales of Suspense number 39, written by Stan Lee and Larry Lieber, from the art of Don Heck and Jack Kirby, Tony was kidnapped by communist Vietnamese guerrillas. That origin has been updated in the comics several times, later to the first Gulf War, and then most recently to Afghanistan, which matches the movie. Speaking of everything that's happened in the last 10 years, that box that the AC/DC music is coming out of in the Humvee is called a compact disc player. Ho Jensen's presence has been remarkably consistent through Iron Man's history. Even though Tony's origin has moved from Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan, Jensen was there for all of them. He first showed up in Iron Man's origin in 1963, and his daughter is currently running around the pages of the U.S. Avengers as Iron Patriot. Another thing that this movie does really well, every Iron Man suit looks perfect to the comics. That goes for the thrown-together suit from the cave to the Mark III armor he ends up in. The later models we see in the movie closely mirror the work of artist Adi Granov, and a story he worked on went to become the loose basis for Iron Man 3. Interestingly enough, the circumstances of Howard and Maria Stark's death, a car accident that ends up being a murder at the hands of the Winter Soldier, stay consistent through multiple movies, and of course the accumulation of that comes in Captain America Civil War. The movie does a really good job of seeing stories from the comics for the future use by the movies. Demon in a Bottle is probably the most famous Iron Man comic of all time. It has Tony losing his company and battling alcoholism. And right away the movie is toying with those themes at Caesars when he misses an award ceremony because he's womanizing at the crab's table. The characters. These are two actors in Iron Man who don't come back to play their roles in the future. The first is General Sanders, the actor who plays Howard Stark in the photos in the magazine Retrospective Stealth Origin Story for Tony. His part is recast as John Slater for Iron Man 2. The other recast is James Rhodes, the man who would eventually don the War Machine armor. He's played here by Terrence Howard, who reportedly demanded a lot of money to come back for Iron Man 2, so his role was recast as Don Cheadle. Happy Hogan, played in the movies by the director of Iron Man, Jon Favreau, first joined the comics in Lee and Heck's Tales of Suspense number 45. Back then, he was a garbage boxer who saved Tony's life and got hired as a bodyguard/driver for Tony Stark. He was a key part of Tony's support squad, marrying and divorcing Pepper at one point before he was killed shortly after Civil War. He is, to the best of my knowledge, still dead. Following Tony's brief fling with Christine Everhart, who comes from a few issues of Iron Man from 2004, where she worked for the Daily Bugle, we're introduced to Jarvis, Tony's AI butler who manages his Malibu house. In the comics, Edwin Jarvis was the Stark family butler who went on to maintain Avengers Mansion for the team. It wasn't until Agent Carter that we discovered that there was an actual breathing Edwin Jarvis who existed in the MCU. Prior to that, Paul Bettany's disembodied voice, his multicolored synthezoid Vision, were the only Jarvi we knew. Tony's gal Friday, Pepper Potts, was also introduced by Lee and Heck in Tales of Suspense number 45. She was his assistant there and remained his assistant off and on throughout their partnership. She was married to Happy for a time and was the one that requested that Tony shuts off Happy's life support when he passed after Civil War. We get the first appearance of the about-to-be-famous Phil Coulson of the Strategic Homeland Intervention and Logistics Division, or SHIELD here. As you now know, he goes on to become no big deal. The villains. Jeff Bridges plays Obadiah Stane, Tony's business partner. Stane was created in 1982 by two comic creators better known for their DC work, Dennis O'Neil of Green Lantern and Green Arrow, The Question, and Batman fame, and Luke McDonough, who helped make Suicide Squad an all-time DC classic. Stane was very much the evil businessman archetype he is in the movie, except he was more explicitly a foil for Tony early on, heading a rival company and going right after Stark International. Stane became the Ironmonger in the comics too, donning the Ironmonger mech in 1985's Iron Man number 200. They play the Mozart and Salieri parallels pretty hard with these two, right down to Stane noodling around with one of Sarli's compositions on the piano. At the time of Iron Man came out, the Ten Rings was actually a clever way to bring up the Mandarin without dealing with the comics version. Making the Ten Rings into an ill-defined terrorist group allowed them to sidestep a lot of the comics version's problematic Asian stereotypes. Instead, we got a problematic Middle Eastern one. The Mandarin was first introduced in Tales of Suspense number 50 as basically an evil Green Lantern. He found an alien-crashed spaceship and adapted 10 rings of power, each with a different ability. The music. You can hear the 1966 Iron Man animated series theme tune several times in the movie, notably as background music in the casino and as Rhodey's ringtone. The song playing while Tony is fixing his car is institutionalized by suicidal tendencies. The song playing on the plane is Slept on Tony by Ghostface Killah. He also appears in a deleted scene in this movie, but since the movie ended up on the cutting room floor, then Method Man gets to keep the title of the best Wu-Tang MCU cameo for his appearance in Luke Cage. By the way, Tony would have won on the last Bet on the craps table. The only time you can bet the don't pass line, the back one, is at the beginning of the round, and if you don't pass and the shooter then rolls a 2 or a 3, you win the bet. Jim Cramer's Mad Money was inexplicably popular with college kids when this movie came out. It was probably the combination of terrible stock tips and the abrasive Morning Zoo soundboard he used to distract away from his terrible predictive record. The Forbes cover in the magazine retrospect origin story for Tony has a spelling error. Tony Stark took the reins of Stark International at 21. He did not take the reins anywhere. Tony's competing with the SR-71 Blackbird for an altitude record when he ices up and falls during his flight test. 2 things on this. The Blackbird was the basis for the X-Men's jet in both the comics and the original movie. And second, icing was the opposite of the problem that real Blackbirds had. The original supersonic spy plane actually got so hot during flight that it grew. It would leak fuel when it was on the ground because they had to build it with heat-related expansion in mind because it got so hot from friction. You can hear the old Space Invaders laser sound when the armor targeting display locks on. Rhodey looks at Mark II, the silver suit, and says, "Next time, baby." Don Cheadle would then come back in Iron Man 2 with the War Machine suit. Don't forget, Rhodey wasn't just War Machine, he also took over the mantle of Iron Man as well. The post-credit scene. Nick Fury was created in 1963 by Stan and Jack, but he is made famous by Jim Steranko, who drew some incredible, weird, groundbreaking stuff on its books. However, Fury as Sam Jackson is a coincidence of 2002's What If Marvel Universe started today, Avengers Reimagining Ultimates, by Brian Hitch and Mark Miller. He was specifically drawn as a portrayal of Samuel L. Jackson, which led to the real Jackson lobbying to play Fury in the movies, which ended up him cast as Fury here. Fury introduces Tony to the Avenger Initiative, which leads us right into the MCU and the first big crossover, the bigger universe that Fury was talking about. Of course, one other thing we can't forget is Stan Lee's cameo in this movie, where he plays Hugh Hefner in a scene where Tony is arriving to his own party, and Tony Stark looks at him and goes, "You look good, Hef." Then Stan Lee does turn around, and we are revealed it is Stan Lee. That's going to do it this week for references and Easter eggs in the MCU. What do you guys think about these Iron Man Easter eggs and references? Leave some comments down below of what you guys' favorite references and Easter eggs are of Iron Man 1, and tune in next time when we cover The Incredible Hulk.